if a film has scenes where it's like this happens and then this happens and then this happens, if it's just a bunch of and thens, that's not an interesting film. Something happens, therefore next thing happens, and you might have event 1 happens, therefore event 2 happens, but then event 3 happens, and then now you're sent down a different tangent within the story, which is a difficult thing to do. That person's not interesting, kind of like, oh, this happened and then this happened and then this happened. But if they're like, oh, this happened and then because of that I had to go, this thing stopped me when I was on my way to try and go get the task completed, and then it becomes a bit more of a drama. Okay, now I'm divorced and 31 and living at home, whereas at least when I was traveling I was divorced and traveling and doing this exciting thing. 2 biggest takeaways from that experience: there are so many more kind people in the world than there are cruel. I stayed at frat houses for free and just slept in people's sofas from people that I met at pubs, random strangers shouting me meals. The best experience of like, actually the world is a really kind, beautiful place. And sure, there's some bad apples, but the bad apples are far fewer than the good. It's incredible that we live in the world that we live in with being able to buy something on Amazon and it rocks up at your door the next day. And that required how many people just to go to work and do things on time and, you know, get it to you.
You know, it's still weird for me to call you Daniel.
Yeah.
Because in Singapore, like all the way till maybe not uni, but I always call my teachers by like their last name. Mr. Wieckmann or whatever. So when I first went to Australia and like went to class, like calling everyone by name is still very weird. Like it feels like I don't have any respect for you, but I have like the highest respect for you.
Oh, thank you.
Like the whole school experience.
Because you're how many years out now? You'd be a year. Out of school, out of your study. You're
out of school. Right after I finished diploma in Singapore, I did national service for 2 years, and then I came here.
Okay, and then you did. And so the year I had you was that year. Cause I'm trying to remember. Was it year 1?
It was my last.
That was
year.
your last year, wasn't
Which
it?
Which was 2 years only. I did uni for 2 years.
That's right, because you were the second semester. Because I was trying to remember our course. It was video production, wasn't it? The second course. Yep. Yeah, great.
It was crazy. It was more I wouldn't say it was the only like beneficial like unit for me, but it was like the most interesting. Was it like set up by you? Because I feel like within every unit I've tried, this was like the most freedom I had. Like for everyone in context, like in Swinburne, I did a unit called Video Project, and then basically we had to do like a documentary of whatever style we wanted, and then you were like guiding us through the thing.
Like my thinking with it was that my role in that space is more like an executive producer on a real video project out in, you know, the professional environment, that an executive producer or a senior producer will sit alongside a creative director or an editor or whoever and kind of be the encourager and the person that guides them along the process and kind of helps be a bit of a sounding board throughout the whole experience.
That makes sense, because I think that's the main difference, because between every other lecture that I've had, I think yours felt like a project, like an actual project. Where the others was like, okay, if you want to get a HD, like this is what you got to do. But yours felt like, okay, this looks good. Well, it doesn't really matter even if you get a HD. I think there was a saying like in our course, or like anyone who's taking our degree in like media, as long as you reach like a distinction, it doesn't really matter, or high distinction, whatever. Then it's like style, right? The style comes into play.
Exactly. Which I mean, and it's one of those things where, because having done a Bachelor of Communications and film school and gotten good grades there.
In RMIT.
At RMIT, like knowing how that actually plays out when you then go to get a job. People don't care about the marks at all. They just care, what can you make, and are you nice to work with? Are you, you know, all those sorts of things are the key things that sort of get you work, really. Or at least that's been the case for me. The degree can be really helpful to open the doors, which I think is why it's important to get it for a lot of people. And it's really good for networking, like just meeting other students and kind of finding like-minded people. But your course was interesting too, because your cohort finished, if memory serves, you all started in COVID, didn't you? So your year. So I think that was also the challenging thing, which I only really picked up on a couple of weeks into that course with you guys, was that, oh, hang on, you guys haven't had much hands-on experience with this camera equipment and audio equipment and editing software, because I think year 1 is designed to be more hands-on, but because that cohort was in lockdown for a large portion of it, they didn't have access to the gear room to grab all the kit the way that you normally would, and so it was a bit of an interesting I
remember going into class and like I had background myself, but no one had background on like how to hold it, because they did their first year in COVID. And then when I came, I was in like the year 2 classes. So I was fresh in like, I was doing year 1 and year 2 units. And like, it kind of shocked me as to like how no one knew how to like hold the camera or like get things started.
Yeah.
And then I guess going into that final year for me, year 2, right? It was like a weird shift because I'm in a class where it's my final year. I feel like everyone should sort of know their way around the camera, but no one really knew.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was still like trying to find my way with like understanding how to. The thing is, I'm from an Asian country, right? My first class, my first year, the whole semester, I had no like Asian friends. Everyone over there was like, Australian. So trying to make friends and like actually be, I guess even talking to lecturers would be harder because there's a lot of older lecturers. And I'm like, oh shit, how am I gonna like work my way around it?
Yeah.
And it was a weird COVID time. Like I can't explain like that whole experience was like.
Yeah. Because how soon from when you landed to when you went to do your course? Did you literally come like a couple of weeks
3
prior?
weeks.
3 weeks, yeah, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And had you ever been to Australia before?
Never.
Yeah, okay.
Technically Perth, but I was 16 years old. So when I came here, I was 22.
Okay. So
like
what made you pick Australia then?
It was just the easiest like place to come over to like. I wanted to come for the 1-year work holiday visa.
Yep.
To try work, but because of COVID, that didn't work.
Yeah.
And then I decided to do a uni degree instead.
Okay.
And then like I was doing music first back at home. So audio was already like. I guess if you put in podcast terms, like it's pretty easy for me.
Yeah.
Because I did music production. Music production is a whole different scale of like Logic Pro and everything. Which, funnily enough, I remember you were in class, right? You were teaching about audio and how to take out the S's. Yeah. And you were playing it through the speakers, right? And everybody was like, what are you talking about? Like taking the S's. And I'm just there. I think I was the only guy being there like, yes, you know this stuff. you know this shit. Yeah.
And I'm sure, because that's one of the hardest things about teaching is just the level of experience in the room, ranging from people like yourself that have audio experience and then kind of know what they're doing and understand what's happening, and then the poor guy in the corner who's like, I'm opening this for the first time and like, how do I do what and what's he talking about? Like it's video production is still new to me because I think the last project, the fact that it was a documentary, was like very, very fun for me. And you've actually like had experience with like working with the production The Giant, and then Freeman, and it was nice to see because I love documentaries. I think all of us love documentaries. Like my thing is Colin and Samir on YouTube. Yeah. Who lost their houses in the fire.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like halfway through the video right now.
Yeah.
And like,
so sad.
The fact that they're still making I thought it was just going to be them talking like on camera, but it was actually like a documentary style. And I feel like this was the thing that I wanted to ask you. Like, I love documentaries, but I don't know how to storytell because storytelling is like everybody can learn about like the LA fires by themselves and whatever, right? But to like start a story from somewhere and then fast forward it and then moving backwards and then going to this so many different editing styles, right? Like how do you learn how to edit like a documentary? Because when I did the project, I'm like, I like the look of it. Yeah. Right. You gave me a HD, thankfully, but I don't know about the storyline. Like the storyline, like what makes a good documentary, dude?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. I think obviously having an engaging subject matter is like kind of one of the primary things of like it just being an interesting topic or an interesting person. If it's a biopic, like there's kind of subcategories of documentary, be it like a political documentary or a crime sort of investigation piece, or it being like a biopic where it's exploring a person's life, or it being something environmental and more scientifically grounded. Like I think depending on the lane with which that doco sits or the genre, then there's kind of a different subset of things that kind of make it interesting. For me personally, I think the big thing in any project that I work on is it kind of has to have sort of 3 key things. One is that it needs to be, as I said, just interesting, like in some way, like, and I need to be interested. Like if I'm not kind of engaged in just being interested in it, I won't have the stamina to last the length of a project, because in most cases it's a year for me just editing on that one project. Yeah, so I've just finished, literally last week I finished the latest doc I've just worked on, which is called Floodland. So that project's about the Lismore floods that happened in 2022, which is the northern part of New South Wales, the city of Lismore or town of Lismore. So they had these crazy floods where the water was like above people's houses, and 3,500 homes destroyed beyond repair, and like this wild flood. So our doco follows the story of that town through 3 kind of key people in the town and how they were affected by that flood. And And so that project started for me January last year, and I literally last week I finished my last day contracted on the project, and this morning I was backing up the hard drives and getting ready to hand it over to the guys who are going to do the score and the mix and everything. So because the project's run for so long, you just need to have something that's like exciting you about it and keeping you interested. So for me, I was just really interested to see, how does a town like that end up where it's ended up, and like what are the solutions that they're coming up with to try and fix this town, because it's built on a floodplain where it floods every year in some way, shape or form. It just depends how bad the flood is as to whether it's going to destroy homes or not. Then the second thing that's really important is that I think it needs to kind of do something technically that's interesting. So I really like documentaries that do something to the form where they're either filming it in an interesting way, like it's particularly beautiful or cinematic, or that they've got some sort of like artistic flair in a way where they're just doing it in an interesting way. So an example of that is like on The Giants, the director for that, Laurence Billier, decided that she wanted to do these 3D LiDAR scans of all the forest environments. So we would film these really beautiful sort of cinematic shots of the forest.
I saw that,
Yeah, and then we would also have these visual representation of the forest through a CG space, and all done as these little point cloud dots. And so that to me was really interesting, because I was like, well, I haven't really seen many environmental docos do that. So I think that gave the film a little bit more of an edge as to why it might be interesting for a viewer to watch, because it's just something that they haven't kind of seen before in that space, which gets harder and harder to do the more content that's created. It's obviously like more people can be like, oh, well, that's just like that, or that's like this thing. But I think if you can find obscure references and merge them and make it into something unique and different, then that kind of is something that also kind of makes the film interesting. And then obviously there's the story beats, which I think is more the question that you're asking.
The
of
story
like,
is the hard part.
Yeah, that story part. And so on this last film, Floodland, we had a scripting consultant, which I've never had before on a project, because the last two projects I did, the director and her partner were the writer, director and producer. So they kind of, within their dynamic, they could kind of bounce off of each other and kind of work out the scripting issues and come to terms with it at their end, and then come to me and I would help guide that process in the edit. Whereas this time around, my director, Jordan, had a script consultant that he would bounce off. And so he would come in and do these sessions with us, this guy, Joseph Nazzetti. So he worked on a film called River. He worked on, I believe, Sherpa. He's now doing he worked on Fungi, like a film about fungus. So he's kind of worked on a lot of these environmental sort of films. But he came in and did this 2-week sort of scripting workshop thing with us, where we kind of had all of the scenes that had been filmed for this Floodland documentary, and then he helped us kind of find the story in it, which was interesting because this is like I started filmmaking in 2005, really. So like I've been doing it for about 20 years. And so you do get to a point where you kind of feel like, oh, well, I know this stuff. Like I've read, A Hero's Journey, and I've read Save the Cat, and I've read like all these scripting sort of, story by Robert McKee, and kind of know story theory. But Joseph coming through was super helpful in just reminding that what makes something interesting is the propulsion of a film, and that be it a scripted thing or be it a documentary project. The film needs to have its own momentum, where it feels like things are happening, and they're not just happening out of this kind of order that the director's decided, but no real consequential order. So an example of that is that the guys who write South Park actually have a good little audio grab on this, how if a film has scenes where it's like this happens and then this happens and then this happens and then this happens, if it's just a bunch of and thens, that's not an interesting film, because you could flip the order of any of those things and the film would probably be the same. Whereas if something happens, therefore this next thing happens, therefore this next thing happens, then you've got consequential action, and there's like a flow and a momentum that happens with that. And you might have event 1 happens, therefore event 2 happens, but then event 3 happens, and then now you're sent down a different tangent within the story. So it's trying to have things have a sense of propulsion and kind of movement with the story, which is a difficult thing to do if your subject matter is too reflective, or if that person's not interesting, or if they're kind of, some of it can be about how people communicate their own past stories. If they're kind of like, oh, this happened and then this happened and then this happened, but if they're like, oh, this happened and then because of that I had to go da 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 da, and then this thing stopped me when I was on my way to try and go get the task completed, and then it becomes a bit more of a drama and more interesting. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I feel like I should have went to like script writing or something, because learning how to hold a camera is like, everybody sort of can learn that quickly, but script writing is a thing that, in my opinion, makes the thing unique. That's why Christopher Nolan's movies are still like, till today, right? I still watch Interstellar being like, how does his brain work? It does not make sense. Even with Oppenheimer, like, it wasn't, I think the topic is quite niche in itself, but how he showed the story building up to that point was like, I don't think anyone works in the way Christopher Nolan works. Because every actor always says like, the way he works is like no phones, no nothing. You really have to commit yourself to it. And I feel like a lot of movies in his realm, and also like a lot of other, what do you call it, like movie documentary style. I've been watching Steve Jobs movies these days.
That's the biopic.
Like the biopic.
Films,
like how they script write, like you said, right? If it's this and then it just doesn't make it a good story, right? That's why low key, if you look at like TikTokers or Instagrammers right now, like when they have like a niche that they're holding on to, I realize the big TikTokers usually have a script, and they're all very, very good at scripting. Scripting was something that I feel like I don't want to script. I want it to be like as raw as possible. But I realized that script writing is so important, like to, what do you call it, like reverse engineer the whole thing. Like you said, right? If the topic in itself is not interesting, then you can't do the project. I think a lot of people who start, including myself, when we first started this, is like, let's just start a podcast for the sake of starting it. But then when you reverse engineer, it's like, is anybody going to listen? Is this topic going to be a thing?
And I think people can sense when someone's passionate about something or genuinely interested in something. Like, you can just tell when someone's fired up and excited, and they're like, I love this, like, this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm talking about, and this, like, that kind of has an energy to it. But like, say Christopher Nolan as an example, like, his through thread through a lot of his films is time. So all of his films kind of have some relationship to time as a constant in his work. So he's just always, and he always plays with time in his films. Like The Prestige plays around with the time and how it kind of jumps backwards and forwards, and then like probably his best example of that is Memento, like where the whole film was kind of backwards, and then there's another scenes that are running forwards. And,
was it Tenet?
Tenet, where like the same thing.
Did you get the movie?
Like, I think that's his weakest. I really don't like Tenet.
Because it's so hard to understand, like as, like the timeline of the whole thing.
And I think the logic of the film, like, I'm really big when it comes to fiction, on whatever universe you create, whatever rules you create, it just has to stick to those rules, and I'll suspend my disbelief as far as you want me to go. But if you've set up some sort of law within the world of your film and then you break that law, you just, it drives you nuts. It's like, you go, well, you just set up this whole thing. I mean, it's like, there's folklore within the books that kind of justifies it more, but a good example of that is like the Lord of the Rings, where the eagles finally come and save them. It's like, why don't they just jump on the eagle and go there and drop the thing in? Like, and there's that whole YouTube channel of how it should have ended.
How it should have.
Where like they lean into that whole thing of like, he's just these films that like had dumb rules and they didn't like, stick with them.
If you've already suspended disbelief in this, like the universe that you're watching and you're paying so much attention to, and then to break the rules that you create is just, once again, you have to suspend the disbelief that you're already suspending.
Like,
well, what are we doing here now?
It's like, well, we were playing a game and you just broke the rules of the game. Like, it's like, I'm not on for that. But like, on the point of Interstellar, like, that's a good example of interesting subject matter. Like, the world's decaying and it's, farming's almost finished because the soil's dead, and like they're going to have to try and find somewhere else to live. So it's like an interesting topic. And then they've done a number of things in that film that visually are quite stylistic and interesting. And even though they're things that have been done before, I think Nolan's really good at bringing things back into a popular cultural sort of space that maybe have been a little bit forgotten or are pushing the boundary. So like the way they did the black hole as like, you know, this groundbreaking mathematical thing where they'd never been able to simulate that in that way. And so that's kind of this exciting technical achievement. And then that film's quite good consequentially of like things happening that then result in other things happening. I do hate in that film how little care he seems to have for his son, yet how much care he has for his daughter. Like the first time I watched it, I was like, why even have a son if you're going to like treat him like this in the script? And also just that whole interaction of like, it's been years and years since I've seen you, Dad, but yeah, sure, go off you go.
Oh yeah, I just realized because by the end it's like, where's the son, right? We only see the daughter being a granddaughter, but we never see the son at the end.
Yeah. My two favourite Nolan films would probably be, aside from the Batmans, because I do love the Batmans, but it would probably be The Prestige and Dunkirk. I really like.
I haven't watched Dunkirk.
Yeah,
I have to get on Dunkirk.
Yeah. So that kind of, and again in Dunkirk he's playing with time. Like a really clever thing in Dunkirk is there's this ticking sound in the background, and like there's different time rules that they're playing with the edit. So one kind of sequence is done like over an hour or something, and then another one's kind of done over a day, and then another one's kind of done over 10 minutes, and it's kind of different timelines that are woven into each other. They might not be the exact times, but it's something like that. And there's this ticking in the background that kind of signifies the metronome of how he's dealing with time within each of these sort of three storylines. So again, it's like this technical thing that's really interesting of like, he's handling this edit in an interesting way that other people don't. Interesting subject matter, Dunkirk. And the story is quite propulsive as to how like events are happening. So I just constantly see these three things as like, you just kind of need to tick those boxes and you're in a good starting position to then make something hopefully interesting. And
do you think he reverse engineers it, or like while he's doing the movie and he's like, we need something to like just so people can see like I put in effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think people working at that top end level have that brain for it. Like the most recent film I've just watched is the new Robbie Williams biopic Better Man, where they've got Robbie Williams as a monkey the whole way through the film, which it's like a normal musical biopic. So it follows the story of Robin Williams, the singer, but instead of him being played by and portrayed by a male actor, he's portrayed by this monkey through the whole film. And tons of people are like, why on earth have they done that? Like, she should just be this actor. Like, why do that? But I can see how the director would be thinking, well, there's that many biopics now, like on Elton John and Elvis, and there's the new one that's just come out of Bob Dylan. Like, it's this thing that like a lot of studios are starting to do. What's our edge? Like, and that's his edge. He's picked, well, I'm going to do this with a CG monkey to like, and I loved it. I thought, like I think it's so clever,
so brilliant.
Yeah,
it's like, and you already mentioned, but like in the space where we have so many musical biopics, to have like your main character not be portrayed by a real actor, but like a CG, like a monkey. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. Wow. So I think there's something interesting, which like even like for you guys starting out on this, like the fact that you're chatting in a car, that was a little bit different than other podcasts. Like, so I think if there's something you can do technically to like just give it a little hook or an edge, like you think of Hot Wings, or you think of like Between Two Ferns, or like it can be a bit of a gag if it's not done right, and it can kind of then just start to feel like this gimmick. But I think if you can do it in a way where it feels very aligned to what's going on, so I think like Robbie Williams is the comedian. Robbie Williams. Like with the Robbie Williams film, I think it works really well because there's a poetry that happens with it. So like scenes that would otherwise maybe just be one thing, because he's a monkey, it now has like this multiple layers to how it kind of comes across.
Yeah, but it's like I wonder what that conversation was like to the studios. He's like, guys, listen to my idea, right? Him as a monkey.
Yeah.
I think everyone in the executives would be like,
huh? So, I actually know. So, he went to Robbie and he asked Robbie, what's your spirit animal? And they were having a chat about it. And I think Robbie didn't initially say monkey.
Yeah, he said lion.
He said lion. Lion. And then Oliver was like,
He's like, I think you're more of a monkey. Yeah. And he's like, okay, I guess that's what.
But that's smart though.
Yeah. But that's a tough chat with the studio, because I think it was like 110 or 120 million or somewhere in that realm to make that film. They actually had to set up Weta Digital, which is normally based in New Zealand, they've now got a Melbourne office, which that production set up the Melbourne office, and now that office is going to stay there to help service more Melbourne-based productions. But just the cost factor to do all that has set it up in a really tough position to make a budget, make a return on their budget. So, but yeah, sorry. I mean, I went way left of field.
I never knew like you went that deep. Like the fact that you even know like the spirit animal and everything. That's crazy, dude. Yeah. But you brought a good point. I wanted to ask, like, within that question, I guess the podcast as well. Why we started in the car wasn't like because that was the thing that we wanted to do. Yeah. It was because like I had nowhere else to record. Yeah. It was like studio wise, it's quiet. I could bring him. I could take any guests. The only downside is like it has to be during daylight. Because we tried to do it at night with lights, it just wouldn't work. Yeah. And funnily enough, we had like our first stranger guest. I felt so bad from that day because like it was 6 months into the podcast, right? Yeah. And then we were somewhere in Box Hill and we were at a car park. And I was like, all right, so we're recording in the car. So I'm getting this like random stranger who's a girl into the car with two guys. Yeah. Just recording it in the car. Yeah. At that moment, I felt like this is cool, but I don't think this is going to work long term. Yeah. Because people are going to be like, why am I in the car? Yeah. Unless like I'm getting 1 million views already, maybe, but still it's like it just feels kind of weird. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. And that's where like it has to kind of be more than just a functional thing, like comedians in cars getting coffee, or like, what's the thing with the carpool karaoke? Yeah. Like it's kind of that's worked into like the gag kind of fits the subject matter, whereas this I can totally see how you're evolving and you want to make it something more comfortable for your guests. And but see, even this dynamic of you being able to jump in and chat, like a lot of podcasts wouldn't do that because they go, well, like I like him in the background. Yeah, like I don't know, if, like are you on camera? Or you got like can people see? He's just his voice, like, which is a little bit radio. Like that's kind of almost like how Jack is Jack Post on like the Hamish and Andy show. Well, you're talking about like you being off camera. Yeah. So like that dynamic is because it's almost a bit like an old school. Well, not that old school, but radio, where like the Hamish and Andy show would have Jack's voice kind of jump in as the producer, and then more people started doing that. At least that's how I kind of noticed it. Maybe a lot of other stations were doing it, but just anything technical that you can do, or like stylistically, or that makes it interesting and just a bit different is a good standout. So I think, and as I said, the more people that make stuff, the more challenging that becomes. But that's where I think like the more people can just lean, especially in the podcast space, to just who they are as a person. Well, there's only one of you, and there's only one of you, and no one's going to be like you guys. So like it is just about trying to share your authentic self in a way that kind of it's like it's something school can't teach you. You know what I mean? Because there's going to be a lot of people going into media communication or whatever, right? And you also did something in that field in RMIT, right? So first question, like, what was RMIT like that time? So I guess for context, so I've been doing video production now for about 20 years. So I finished high school in 2005, took a year off, worked as a landscaper for a year, and basically just saved up my money to buy a computer and a camera. And then I did film school for 3 years, which was an advanced diploma of screen. And being TAFE, the good thing about that is you kind of do the TAFE was structured. The first semester was theory, and then the second semester you all made films, and you would rotate on each other's projects. So you'd have a chance to be a cinematographer on one friend's film, a writer on another, a director on your own, and you'd kind of just pick based off your own interest, and we'd kind of all negotiate roles. So that was film school. And then from film school, I transferred all my credits into a bachelor program. And because I transferred the credits, I did the bachelor's program in a year and a half. So middle of 2011, I graduated from that. And then Australia had this program called the New Enterprise Initiative Scheme, which was where the government would pay you to start a business for a year if you could kind of show them that you had a sound business plan and kind of an idea of what you would want to do as a business. So I went into that program, which basically funded my studio to start up for 1 year. So it paid me a base salary, I think it was like 35,000 or 20,000 or somewhere around there for basically 12 months. And I just took that as, okay, that's my wage. And now I need to go and get work and try to start a business. So finishing my degree middle of 2011, I reached out to a company called Thank You Water at the time. They're now called Thank You. And they were just starting up themselves. And I wanted to kind of just help them with video production. And so
doing that with them, they were pretty savvy within the marketing, social media sort of space, and kind of utilizing their audience to help sell bottled water that would fund water projects overseas. And so through them, I ended up meeting a bunch of other non-for-profits like Samaritan's Purse and Salvation Army and Tear Fund and World Vision, and basically got work through all those guys to go do more non-for-profit sort of video production work. So that ended up getting me to, I don't know how many countries, like 30 plus different countries, traveling the world filming non-for-profit things, alongside then also doing commercial work. So I had a friend who, through Thank You Water, they ran a cycling event to try and raise some money for Thank You Water, and I helped film that cycling event. Met some people in that cycling space and started doing some work with a company called Rafa. And Rafa's like a really high-end cycling apparel brand. Yeah. So just by the association of me working with Rafa and doing their videos in Melbourne, and then me doing these videos for Thank You, both those brands had a bit of clout to kind of be like, oh, Thank You's a really cool brand in that social enterprise space. Who's doing their videos? Oh, it's my company, Kintaro Studios. Rafa's this really cool cycling brand. Who's doing their videos? Oh, it's this company, Kintaro Studios. And so that just got me this sort of snowball of work. I built up that studio until 2018. Got to the point where I had a shared office space in Collingwood that me and 4 friends had the lease on, and we kind of then had another 4 people that came and hot desked in that factory. It was quite a big factory space. Like we had like room enough to kind of shoot in it and play ping pong and do all that stuff. And I had 1 employee and a mate of mine who also ran a video production studio. We would tag team with each other. So he would come and work for my studio under my studio name, and then I would go and work for his studio under his studio name. So that was the guy, Christian Woodmensey, and then my one staff was this guy, Joel Taylor. And so it was kind of the 3 of us that was Kintaro Studios. And then 2018, my world got turned upside down where I was married, but turned 30 and got divorced in that year of turning 30. So me and my ex separated, and I had this huge revelation that I'm a workaholic and that all I do is make videos 24/7.
Why do you think that is, right? Like every guy after a breakup is like, we're workaholics now, and then we have to go to the gym.
I think because so much of a guy's identity is what we do, and it had like, I mean, if you look at last names literally used to be based off your profession. So you'd be like, you know, John Smith, and it's because he was a Smith. And he'd be, you know, I didn't know that. Like it would be based off the things that we do with our lives. And I think as well as a big part of like, I mean, this isn't for every woman, but for women having to raise kids and look after children, like especially back in the day, like so much of life's purpose came from that nurturing and tending to a family and stuff. Whereas for us, it was about finding the job and paying the bills type of thing. So I think there's a little bit of it that's just like maybe an evolutionary thing. That's kind of how we're wired. But I've also heard a quote of like men typically are more interested in things, whereas women are more interested in people, typically, if you just kind of do a very broad brushstroke for how some of the differences between men and women. And so I think men being interested in things, we can often get, like I would just be obsessed with kit, I'd be obsessed with editing, and I'd be obsessed with, and my ex, she was a paramedic, and so she was very interested in people and like helping people and looking after people that were sick, and like, so at that time, I just had a very unhealthy work-life balance and would be at the office at all hours, and I also wasn't particularly disciplined with my schedule and would procrastinate and then have to stay up late to get things finished, or tech issues would happen and then I'd just have to stay back, and rather than kind of biting the bullet and going, well, this is just something for Monday, I'd just work the weekend, because I, you know, at that time my income wasn't capped, so the more I worked the more I made, and so there was that kind of financial incentive. But when all that kind of imploded, I then decided I'm just going to go travel. And as actually a friend of mine, I wanted to just shut the business and walk away and never do filmmaking again. And he was this family friend of mine, Daniel Pampuk, who used to be the principal of my school, and he was sat on the board of my parents run a non-for-profit, and so he sat on the board of that non-for-profit. And I met with him just to get some life advice with all that was going on, and he was like, Dan, I think you need to just pause. What you're going through is a traumatic thing. You need to just, if you can, get someone to look after your business, and go travel for a year and just kind of decompress and come back and then work out what you want to do. So that's exactly what I did. So I had the two friends that were working for me, Christian and Joel. They looked after my business while I travelled. I took a year off, 2019, just before COVID. I was actually meant to be in China when COVID all started, but my brother got engaged and I had to come back early. So I bought a one-way around the world ticket. So I was flying Melbourne to LA, New York to London, London to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Melbourne, and it was just open-ended with no kind of particular plan. So I landed in LA and was like, okay, I might go surf for a month. And so I just surfed for a month and then, just travelled. Came back to Australia for my brother's wedding and actually decided I was going to leave filmmaking and go work for a non-for-profit in the UK that worked with refugee kids and a lot of immigrants in the UK that had recently moved out. And so I'd lined up that job. I was all set to go back, and then COVID happened, and then I was stuck in Melbourne at my parents' place, like 31 at that stage. And then sort of the cycle sort of started again of like, okay, now I'm divorced and 31 and living at home. Whereas at least when I was traveling, I was divorced and traveling and doing this exciting thing. But
what was that like? Like traveling around the world? Like,
I loved it. It was the best thing ever. Like I think the two biggest takeaways from that experience was that there are so many more kind people in the world than there are cruel. Like the amount of people that like I stayed at frat houses for free and just slept in people's sofas from people that I met at pubs. I had like random people like put me in their house for like a week in the south of France. I like had like random strangers shouting me meals and stuff. Like it was just the best experience of like actually the world is a really kind, beautiful place, especially after going through something like a divorce where you can end up a bit bitter and a bit jaded and kind of going, everyone's mean and people are just out for themselves. And like it was a very enlightening thing to kind of just realize that the world is actually a beautiful, kind place. And sure, there's some bad apples, but the bad apples are far fewer than the good, which I think is in general just a rule of it takes really only a couple of bad players to make things really difficult and challenging for everyone. But if you just think about society at large and how many of us need to be well behaved just from even a law-abiding position to have the world run the way it runs, like it's incredible that we live in the world that we live in with, you know, being able to buy something on Amazon and it rocks up at your door the next day. And that required how many people just to go to work and do things on time and, you know, get it to you.
Was that perspective something that you hadn't really come across before you went traveling?
Well, I think I had it beforehand. So my dad was a minister in a church, and so I grew up in a church world and I'm a Christian. And so that faith position leans me towards that way. But I think going through that divorce experience, I kind of was at a real questioning place of like, who is God and what is the meaning of life? And like, you know, questioning the fundamentals of everything. And so I think it just re-emphasized that those things that I believed when I was a lot younger actually are really fundamentally true. And so that was kind of, one of the biggest things. And then my other really big takeaway was that I came away with this saying of just a stranger is just a friend without a name. Like I think that I got into this sort of flow with that travel of, because you're traveling solo, at least at a hostel, meeting people and then having a group of friends to go sightsee for the day, or rocking up in a town where you don't know anyone and then making some friends and being able to like go do adventures on the weekends together. So it kind of became this really beautiful experience of just kind of leaning into, I guess, my extroverted nature, which is sort of my default anyway, but kind of realizing what I had to offer other people and what they had to offer me, and kind of coming back with a bit of perspective of like, actually, I live such a privileged life to be able to do the things that I do, with my family context, with my ability to be able to do the work that I do, with my health. Like that was a big thing of getting sick a couple of times and meeting other people that were incredibly sick. I did the Camino, which is this pilgrimage across Spain. So the typical pilgrimage, so it's this Catholic thing, but anyone can do it. But it's basically where people go to where they believe St. Paul is buried. So most of the time people go from not Paris, but the south of France. They start in the south of France and walk the entire width of Spain to the west coast of Spain, to St. Paul, to Compostela. And so I did half that route. So I did about 400 Ks of just walking across Spain. And so the beautiful thing about that is everyone that's doing that walk, they're either on it for the holiday because it's beautiful, but most are on there on some sort of quest to try and find something. So there's lots of students there that had like just finished their degrees and were trying to work out what to do with their lives, or people with terminal illnesses that were like, I just really want to do this to kind of be at peace with what I'm facing, or so that whole walk was again just another experience of kind of just realizing like that my body's healthy and I don't have to worry about cancer like that guy's worrying about, and like I know what career, at least this career that I'm in, looks like and what I value from it, unlike that student that's just finished and has no idea what they want to do and just realized they don't like it at all. Like it was kind of this very insightful thing of kind of going, well, I do love filmmaking. Like I've always loved filmmaking. It was just the unhealthy aspects of it that kind of ruins that relationship that I needed to kind of grow up from and learn. So to cut a really long story short, I finished that, at least my European travel was finished with the pilgrimage, and then I spent a month in China and went to South Korea and did some stuff there, and then came back to Melbourne, and then lockdown happened. And when lockdown happened and I couldn't go to the UK to do this non-for-profit work that I'd lined up, a friend reached out saying she was doing this documentary on Kathy Freeman and would I be interested? And I was like, oh, I'd love to. Like that sounds amazing. Like that's kind of why I went into starting my own studio and starting a business, was to eventually try and make feature docos and to get into fiction filmmaking. But at the time she couldn't hire me because I didn't have the screen credits. So I ended up, she was at a hot desk studio. I ended up hot desking a desk right next to her desk.
Oh, what does that mean?
So a hot desking studio is like a studio space where you can just rent a desk rather than renting the whole space. And you get access to like a shared meeting room and a shared kitchen and stuff, but you just rent one desk. And so I knew she had a desk in this particular office space, and next to her was an empty desk. And I thought, if I can rent that desk, then maybe there might be some things throughout the day where she's like, you know what, it'd just be really good if you could animate this thing or like edit this thing or whatever. So I rented that desk. And then throughout the process, the editor that they had couldn't do it because of COVID. And she was like, actually, Dan, this whole thing's changed. Can you just come and be the editor?
God speaking to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, perfect. Great. Yeah. So like there's all these things that are like, and I've said this whenever I talk about my story, because I think I even shared a bit about it on the first day of when I maybe had you guys at the uni. Because I think it's important to kind of know someone's context and why they're doing what they're doing and where they come from, because it just plays out into so many things, especially when you're making art, like when you're working in a subjective space where there's no like hard right and hard wrong. It's really helpful to know someone's context as to like, oh, that's their worldview and their perspective, and this is playing into that, and that's why it's probably important for them to do things in this way. Like I think it's quite helpful. But it's also, there's so many threads to the story as to like how things played out career-wise, and then how things have played out to the place now where I've remarried and my wife's expecting our first baby, little baby boy in April.
That's cool.
So thank you. Yeah. So I'm about to be a dad, and like, you know, life has kind of been restored and even better, and now I'm doing the films that I want to do and all that sort of stuff. Like it's quite, insane to see just how like all the little bits and pieces kind of come together. And it's definitely been a case of like we're saying, like what keeps the story interesting. It's definitely not been and then this happened, and then this happened. It was like, well, this happened because this happened, and I did that because COVID came, and you know, but then what do I do? And like it's, I think that's where great films imitate life. Like there's drivers that are pushing the story forward, and then there's things that happen in life that kind of bump you off the path in a way that you don't expect. So one of the story structures that I really, really like, that I think for me the best films follow, is the sort of 3-act story structure of ideal, ordeal, new deal, is the way I remember it. So everyone starts out with an ideal. So like for me, in my context, in my personal life, like that was the ideal of my parents met when they were 15, each other's first boyfriend, girlfriend. They got married at 21. They had me at 24, you know, happily ever after.
If only it was that simple. If only it was that simple today.
So I was like, when I was 15, I was looking around going like, who's going to be my wife? Like, 15. But then like you have the ordeal, like for me, of like divorce, life totally turned up, and especially in my context of growing up in a church environment, like divorce being quite frowned upon and like a last resort, like you kind of don't turn to that. And so then having to kind of redefine what life looks like and what my values are and how does the world, you know, and so then that's the new deal. That's like the new forming of like you have to reconcile this ideal with this ordeal that's happened to kind of reconstitute a new deal. And so if you see that 3-act story structure, it's in like hundreds and hundreds. It's the hero's journey. It's like a really foundational mythological storytelling structure where like it's every superhero story, it's every like Disney Pixar film, like Finding Nemo follows it to the absolute, you know, T. Like it's very like that's also another structure that I think if you can kind of have that in some form. So like the latest doco I've worked on, we only have one scene of Ideal kind of at the front end of the film, but it follows that same structure. It's like Ideal, this guy loves this town, it's beautiful, it's where he's always wanted to live. Ordeal, it's flooded, it's completely destroyed. So now how does he reconcile this event with the ideal? Like, is this place a good place or is it actually a terrible place? And it's like, well, ultimately he has to come to the position of like, it's kind of both, but I need to kind of live life differently now that I know that it's both. Yeah. So, yeah. So again, another. I can just ramble.
No.
So.
Dude, that was perfect because I feel like my hit was following Casey Neistat for a little while. He was just like, is the basic intro problem resolved?
Yeah.
And then I think your perspective is like, that perspective, there is definitely something that I'm gonna, I write down like stories in my notes.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I rewrite it. So like when I'm telling someone a story, it sounds crazy, but like when I'm telling someone a story, like I make sure I write it down first and then I know how to story tell. Because like your journey, right? I guess for me, it's going through the same thing as you. Like when I came here, I feel like in Singapore, life is very and then. So you go from primary school, secondary school, degree, national service, degree, work. And it's very, very odd for you to like take a year off. Like if you're taking a year off, it's like, what the hell are you doing with your life? It's very strict with like the Asian culture and everything.
Yeah, wow.
And then coming here where I hear people like actually taking that backpack trip or like you taking a year off, that was very, very weird to me. I still feel like if I take a year off, like last year I didn't find any job, that to me felt like very, like I was wrong, like I was doing something wrong. But it was the year where I've learned the most. He went through it with me because I had a breakup last year as well. And like you, right, like I felt like I had to go back to God. I had to go back to the gym. Like everything had to be like restarted. Yeah. He had diabetes. So like we all had our thing.
Yeah, wow.
And then crazy enough, I think within that 6 months, I think both of us dialed in to like actually sit down. You know what? Let's take 6 months off. He took 6 months off of school. I took 6 months of like, I'm not going to apply for any jobs. I'm just going to focus on this. And I feel like slowing down in this economy is very, very weird. And I've learned a lot from just like sitting down and praying. And I think when hearing you do like a quote unquote pilgrimage it's inspiring me to like maybe take this year to go for because I'm Muslim, so to go for that pilgrimage. A lot of my friends have been doing that, and it's actually part of your story, right? Like I guess in my opinion, because I believe in God, I think that was part of your journey, and to actually get that Freeman gig, like if you didn't go through that, then that wouldn't have happened. Like that luck. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally think so. And I think there's always this weird synergy that happens with projects. And I'm like, Freeman, this will sound as corny as all get out, but like there was something to that whole process of just learning what it meant to be like a free man. Like what does it mean to like operate in the world as like someone that is free and not sort of tied to like preconceptions or boundaries that are placed on us. Like I think Kathy Freeman's story is so much that, like she's this woman that has been able to kind of live above and beyond the expectations that were probably placed on her as a little girl. And there's like these, one of the reasons I love filmmaking is because it helps kind of explore and ask these big questions. And the beauty of these long form projects is because you're spending so much time on the one bit of material, you're forced to go a bit higher in your thinking and a bit deeper in your understanding of like life and what makes things interesting and like why are we here. Like I think part of like what you're saying of both of you being able to get dialed in, like I think one of the biggest existential questions is like, why is there suffering? Why is there pain? Like, especially in a religious context, like why would a good God allow a child to have cancer or for there to be difficult things in the world? And like, not to justify those horrible things that happen, especially to children. 'Cause I think there's a particular thing for people, and it's like, but kids, man, like, how can that be?
Even
like,
we can't answer that question.
Yeah, right. Like, but I think there's something about pain that forces you to kind of wake up and to kind of work out what is important and what isn't important, and to have a structure of like a hierarchy of value or belief, or to prioritize and organize things. So like, like it's interesting to hear for both of you that like you have this difficulty, and then you respond to it, and you kind of go, well, you can either take it lying down, or you can kind of stand up and kind of push through. And it's like the classic thing of, I'm sure you've spoken about a lot, of like going to the gym, of like your muscles don't grow unless they tear a bit, and they don't get bigger unless you're kind of pushing against a force that's maybe a little bit more than you think you can handle. And then when you manage to push it, you grow and you develop, and then you can take on the next big thing. Like, I do think if you're not actively pursuing those things, life just does that anyway, and then you kind of have to do it. So I think there's so much learning that from my situation of what happened, is to like, like I kind of want to willingly take on a bit of suffering and pain, so that way I'm more prepared for when the unexpected suffering and pain actually happens, because it's going to be there
it's
at some
come
point
anyway.
And it's interesting. Like, I think even for like, if you look at mythologies and storytelling and kind of what happens in different contexts and cultures around the world, like particularly for men, there's these rites of passage where they have to go away from society for a bit. Like in an Australian Indigenous context, it's like going walkabout, where like you'd go off with the men, sort of private business happens, and it often involves suffering and pain and loneliness.
National service for me.
National service for you, where like you just have to grow up. I wish I could. There's a part of me that's like, man, there's some stuff we do terribly in Australia. Like, I think, speaking to what you're saying of feeling that pressure of like not a lot of people being able to take a year off and all that sort of thing. I was just listening to something on another podcast this morning about how because I'm going to be becoming a parent in April, that in a lot of cultures, the newborn child is kept with the parents almost 24/7 for the whole first year, especially if you live in a household where you don't have a lot of rooms and you've got one shack where the kind of everyone's living in that one space. And like in that one space, you'd have your elder, you'd have your grandparents that might live in at least the same household. And like, it's this real group community thing of raising this child. Whereas here in a Western culture, it's pretty normal for people to be like, you got to put your kid in the room and just let them cry for hours and hours and hours. And I don't know what me and my wife are going to do with how we're going to raise our little one. But like, there's just a logic to that where I'm like, that's pretty weird that like this kid's like in this stomach of this woman for 9 months, and then they come out, and then you go, let's shove them in a room by themselves and not have them with you.
So
like,
I haven't heard someone actually say those words out loud, like from like, because I feel like I've always like thought of that a little bit. I thought it was a little weird, but
and there's like the whole eldership of like respect for your elders and stuff. Like, we do so terribly here of like shoving out our grandparents in, aged care facilities where we just pay people to look after them, and there's not that like care of a family and being a family unit. Like, there's so much stuff, especially from a lot of my early years of traveling and working abroad, where I'm like, man, that culture does that way better than what we do. And like, I get there's different pressures with that, like particularly for some of my friends from Malaysia, like that pressure of like, I'm going to have to look after my parents when they're older, because there's not the super or the same sort of structure, like that as a pressure. I can only imagine what that would be like as a kid to a parent, thinking it's just a given that I'm going to be looking after you and I'm going to return the favor of.
I don't know what it is with like the Western culture. I mean, there's always a pro and con. There's no like perfect one, in my opinion, at least. But like, I think the starting point is like I said, the name thing, right? Like, I'll never call my mom or like my granddad by their name. Like, I'll always call them like, in Malay, I'm also Malay, but I'm from Singapore. So I call them like Tok, which is grandfather. Nenek, grandmother. Like, there's always like a status there first. Even for my aunties, like, I'll call them like auntie something. They will not be, I'm not going to call them by name. Like, call them by name gives it that like, I don't know, like, you're too comfortable. You know what I mean? It's like that clip with Oprah Winfrey. I forgot who was the guest. It was like, she asked the husband, and I think it was a famous Indian like couple. They were like, why are you still staying with your family? And then he looked at her, why are you not living with your family? why?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And there's this weird, like, it's so, like, the States is so interesting for it because the culture there, which you always see from, like, how much American sort of news and media we consume here in Australia. It's kind of like, I find Australia's an interesting place given that our main sort of media consumption is American media. Yeah. So I always knew that, like, oh, it's this thing where, like, you're a student, you finish, and then you go off to college, and you kind of go almost as far away as you can from where your parents are as, like, part of the college experience. Yeah. And being in the States when I was traveling and just seeing that and being like, okay, so you got these young people that are essentially, like, their friends kind of become their family because they've ripped out of their family context. And then the culture of the States being very, like, your success is just based on how hard you can work, and, like, very, like, self-driven, and, like, you know, that sort of grind culture, and, like, like just that whole dynamic that the States has of, like, you leave, you go to college, you're independent, you're on your own, you're, like, kind of like, you need to just do it on your own and kind of self-actualize everything that you want in your life through hard work. It's just an interesting thing that's so different to other cultures in the world, rather than being like, oh no, we're actually like a community and we're going to, like, help each other and do this together as a family, and kind of it actually sounds cool when you're talking about it. And then I've been listening to a lot of this guy. His name is John Deloney. He's a therapist, and he does a lot of, like, calls with this. And he said this blew my mind a little bit. It was like, we're still functioning on an ancient technology. Our body is, like, the same since, like, day one, right? But now everything is different. And there's this part of us that's like, we still want a community. We still want to build life around a community. And that's how we were wired, right? Like, we have, like, maybe just Melbourne CBD in a whole, right? That may be, like, your community. But then now it's like, you leave your family and then you go to a whole different community. And then we are wondering, like, I guess in the Western culture, they're wondering, why are people anxious? Why are people depressed? Because you're leaving your whole family. That's not, we're still wired in this old ancient brain. Obviously, we're going to be depressed. Obviously, we're going to be anxious. Like, our whole network system is gone. And I don't think it's, I've realized it's not normal. And it's cool and it sounds fun, but it does come with that cause of, like, anxiety and depression. Because in Singapore, it's like, it's a very small country. I would say the size would be like Melbourne CBD to, like, Frankston. That would be the size. And the idea of moving out isn't really there until, like, you really make your, like, full-time job or you get married. So, like, even my brothers right now, right? If I was in Singapore, I would still be living with my family, and that's not, like, a shameful thing because the economy is just built like that. So I don't know, with Western culture, if that's, like, their thing, I feel like maybe we have to, like, reverse this thing and, like, think about it again. But I don't know how you want to raise your kid. And well, I mean, I always had more, I guess, ideal ordeal, new deal. Ideal, I had, like, ideals of, like, wanting to live on a farm with my family, because I've got a little brother and a little sister. My brother's married with 2 boys and my sister's married with 2 girls, and so, like, we always thought, you know, maybe one day we'd be, like, on a big farm, we'd each have our own houses and, like, be like this sort of, like, I don't know, what is it? What's that? There's a Mormons, or is it Jehovah's Witness, or who is it? There's a group that kind of live in, like, these, like, Amish, more like Amish,
Mormons,
like maybe in that kind of, like, style of thing. But then you kind of go, it would be nice to have a house. Maybe I want to kind of do, like, there is an allure to kind of doing things on your own and kind of making it a bit on your own. But I think it's interesting. Like, I just find it wild that you can be in a country like Malaysia or Singapore, and then be like, I'm just going to go to Australia and go do all this there, and then, like, that becomes your country. Like, Jerry Seinfeld has a bit on, like, how there's people that, like, could just, you know, live in different cities for different parts of the year, whereas, like, back in the day it would have been like a year-long journey to get there by horse and cart, and you'd be like, oh, we got here for the summer, yep, great, we'll better turn around. Like, like, I find it, on the one hand, so impressive that, like, you guys can be doing what you're doing and just kind of, you know, but, like, live abroad and set up a whole life. And then on the other hand, especially teaching at Swinburne, seeing all those international students and just being able to observe the difference in the grind of being there and doing what they're doing, like, be it because it's in a second language and they're kind of having to navigate, you know, doing a whole course in not their native tongue, or just the, like, time zone shift. Like, there's a couple of students I had that it felt like they were spending each night just online to kind of keep tabs on their community from abroad, but then having to deal with this time zone and all of the university pressures and just the difficulty of that. Like, it's just such a multi-layered thing of like studying and living abroad. And I can't imagine really. I don't know where I was going with it, but it's just something that's just.
I mean, thankfully, English is my first language, so I'm good with that.
You've got, that's the beauty of Singapore.
But that's the whole point of the podcast, right? Like, I've been listening to podcasts since I was probably 16, 17.
Yeah.
And when I first came here and like everybody was Australian in my class, I just wanted to share this like experience and to actually show, because there's so much things that you see in the media, but in real life it's so different. If you search like international students in Australia on YouTube, it's all just news channels on like the scams, the amount of money that we're bringing, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I know in reality, no one thinks like that. Like, everybody loves the international students, like like third culture kids as well, right? He's from India, but he grew up here.
Yeah.
And I just realized there was no one sharing these stories.
Yeah.
And fair enough, like some people who's their first, I've brought people who's from like Bangladesh, China, and their first language is in English. Obviously, they can't be the one starting the podcast. And there's like, I just love sharing stories, like extracting that information.
Yeah.
And I realized I had that skill when I was talking to, I won't say the person's name, there was this one friend where I was talking about her life. And suddenly she was telling me about like her childhood trauma and all these kind of things. And I'm like, at that moment, for some reason, even though I was listening, I was like, this could be a great podcast. Like, but I was trying to understand, being self-aware, like, how do I extract this information from someone? And I think that's also the behind the scenes in a documentary that people don't see. As much as like there is a technical term or like the technicalities behind storytelling, as a videographer as well for you, right? Like, to make a good documentary, right? There's that people skill that people don't see behind, where like, if you want to shoot someone, there has to be a relationship between you and the person, right? You can't just have that camera there, right? So I guess for students out there who's also in a similar line with us, other than the degree itself, right? Would you say like the people skill is a lot more important? Because I don't like the way we phrase it in Western culture. It's like soft skills. It makes it sound like it's less than the hard skills. Yeah. But in my opinion, the soft skills is like so much more important than the hard skills.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when I was running my production company, Kintaro Studios, the guy who I employed, Joel Taylor, I knew him through other circles and bumped into him where he was working a retail job. And I was like, why are you working this retail job? I thought you had ambitions to do media or film or something. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, quit this and come work for me. And then he came and worked for me. He had no degree, had no like real experience in that space. But I loved the guy. He was really easy to get along with. He had a lot of ambition and drive and wanted to kind of work really, really hard. And so those two things would win out over someone who's like, oh, I've done this. Like, because I just wanted someone that I knew I could spend a lot of time with, and that we could kind of do stuff. And like, that stuff plays hugely into it. Like, I remember one guy I worked with at an agency for a bit who ended up getting fired, and the main reason he got fired was he just had poor hygiene. And so one of the guys in the office was like, I just can't stand the smell. Like, he needs to, and like,
to go shower or something.
Yeah, like, so like they tried to address it with him in this sort of soft way, and like, so like those sorts of like, as you say, soft skills are like really fundamental things, but like those little things play a huge role when you got to work with people 24/7. Because video production, and particularly documentary, you're working in small groups for a long period of time, and you're dealing with like pretty fundamental stuff, like how people see the world and like their belief systems and things. So like, you just want to know that like, even if you don't align on like a religious level or like a philosophical level, that like, that you're a kind, empathetic, like person is like, it goes a really long way in just being able to make inroads with people going, oh yeah, this is a guy I could like, or a girl that I could hang out with, and just know that it's not going to be, they're not going to be a hurdle. Because there's so many hurdles, as you guys would know, with making stuff. Like, the technology is one side, and then like the access is another side, and then just the time. It's like, if you've got difficult people or people that have things going on like that, it just can be a burden that's quickly dismissed by hiring someone else and going, well, that person's, you know, they're on time, they're polite, they've got good energy, they're, you know, showing initiative, with doing stuff. Like you'll hire that person over someone that might be, difficult
to work with.
But maybe knows a bit more on After Effects or something. Like, you know what, that person can learn After Effects. They're a lot nicer. Like,
yeah, which is crazy, right? Like right now when we're applying for jobs, it's like, I remember we did an episode actually, like we reviewed people's like job applications, not job applications, they're like, what do you call it? Like job postings, right?
Like, Dude,
some were like 5-year experience, drone experience, DSLR experience. I'm like, okay, that's a lot. And then I looked at the main job, it was like beginner video editor, and I'm like, what do you want? Like, I think finding someone who you can actually like just relate to is so much harder. So much harder.
And it's hard. I do empathize with some of those companies, because it's also hard when you're writing those listings of like, if you do have to cold hire, like you obviously want to be able to look at someone's show reel and go, oh great, they've done what need to get them to do. Perfect. Just do that for me. Like, that's kind of the dream. But I do think, just in my personal experience, that with when I've done hiring or working with people, it's been really based off that kind of the energy that someone brings to set and their kind of capacity to learn and their ability to take critique and feedback. And because I guess circling back to that thing of what we're talking about a little bit earlier about like the individualistic culture of America and kind of these different things of like having to kind of do things on your own and being like completely self-actualized and all that sort of stuff. There's a great quote in The Giants from this guy Merlin Sheldrake, who says, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but he says something like, the idea of the individual isn't an observable fact. Like in nature, if you look at nature, everything is these nested relationships and these ecosystems of like, that moss can only grow because it's got the tree, and the tree can only grow because it's got the soil, and the soil's only there because it's got the bugs, and it's like these like related cycling things. And so I think, like particularly with all of the work and stuff that I've done, sometimes, because when I started my production company, the 5D Mark III came out the year I graduated. So it was like the birth of the like solo individual filmmaker, like where you could just grab a camera and go out and do it. And so like, I think there was a little bit of a proud moment for me of being like, I can do this all on my own. Like, I don't need anyone. And this is like what I've got to offer. And I can just go, I can shoot, I can edit, I can cut, and I have gotten a lot of work because I can do a lot of things in the space. Like I DP on The Giants. I shot a bunch of it. I edited it. I did some animation on it. Like I helped do some of the LiDAR scan stuff. Like I've got a good competency across a large area of things. But when you look back, you go, but there was no way in heck I could have done any of it by myself. Like you need all these people around you to help support and to kind of, be it the funding or the scripting or the even just bouncing ideas off each other. Like I used to say I hated editing and that I would never be an editor.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and my primary thing now is editing. Yeah. And the thing I realized was I actually don't hate editing. I actually really love editing because it's where it all gets made. What I hated was being alone in a room by myself for 8 hours and having to try and work it out. And on these bigger projects, you get a director that sits with you. And even though me and this past director, Jordan, who's been working on Floodland, like we'll have days where we'll butt heads and think completely differently about a scene and be like, I want it to go this way. And he'll be like, no, I want it to go. I'm like, but why? And we kind of... I love it. Like, and I hope he loves it too, because it's like, that's the work, is like actually having something to push against in that same way with like lifting weights or whatever. Like you kind of, I find you need a little bit of that to and fro and people around you to actually get stuff done. Like it'd be interesting to like think about like how far you would have been able to go with this if you didn't have, your man sitting here.
Yeah, that was the first thing. Like, I started a podcast by myself. And like you, right? I think everyone's always like, we have a camera, we have an iPhone, like we can do this by ourselves. And then the number one thing I realized that was the problem with, the main issue with doing a podcast by myself. The whole point of a podcast is to bring conversations together.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is fucking stupid. Why am I doing this by myself?
Yeah.
And then we started it together. And then slowly we got guests and everything. And that's where I was like, oh, like it's possible, like to actually bring people in. And not only is it possible, you have to bring people in. And that's why this year is like, it's a lot of pushing. Like, trust me, you're not the first person that I'm like pushing, like, hi, do you want to do this? So like, and I think it was a weird brain thing for me to be like, I have to push myself to be in like uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us in, I guess my generation people, like I think we feel like the internet makes us feel like we're connected, and we can sort of chase virality behind like just doing TikTok or whatever, and we might get it. But at the end of the day, if you want to start a business or you want to start something long term, you still have to make like connections within that community, within your community, right? Which is how you started getting like your Freeman gig, your Swinburne gig is all within that community. And then you can build something upon like a new community.
Like and things just snowball from one thing to the next. And like the good beauty with having like a partner or like someone to help you or a colleague or to undertake creative stuff is like, the days where you wake up and you're like, I'm just too tired to do it. I'm just so not energized. Like knowing that, oh, well, my director's going to be there at this time and we need to sit there together and do it. That like there'd be days where I'd go there, and I'm sure he had the same where we just weren't saying it to each other. But I was like, 100% there was days where I was in the office like, this is the last thing I want to do. I just want to go to bed. I'm so tired. Or like I've got this other thing to do, but I've got to do this because this guy, I see this director and I've got to do it with him. And so his energy would then pick me up and propel me through that day. And I'm sure there were days for him where he was like, I just don't want to be here doing this. But he's like, well, the editor's going to be there and I need to work with him on this thing. Like it's, I think that in general, there's been a bit of a wave. Because even when I was coming up of like, solo DSLR filmmaker, like you can do all this on your own. It used to be this 20-person crew and now you can just do it. Like, I think like that whole mentality is there's just so much wrong with it. Of like, actually you just need it's you maybe can do it on your own. Like there's definitely been nice films I've made on my own, but like, was it fun and would I want to do it again? Like the ones that I enjoyed were the ones where there was people around, and like I especially at my age now, so I'm 37 in a couple of weeks. And like now my focus so much is like not just on the work, but how the process in making. And like I really want the process just to be fun for everyone, and everyone to be like, I just enjoyed that so much and I want to do that again. Because if you're not doing it in that way, like why would you want to?
And going through those hours of editing with someone who cares about it just as much as you, that's got to be like so much better.
A million times better. So what's the end goal for you guys then? What's the big dream?
For me personally, like
for both of you,
the main vision I put over there is like sharing real stories that inspire.
And I love that.
There's one main, I feel like the main boss that I want to get, I don't know about him, but like my boss is like George Janko show. He used to work with Logan Paul. I don't know if you know Logan Paul. He's pretty big. Andrew Tate is one of them. Just because he's such an interesting character. He used to be one of the most like misogynistic person at that time, like probably 5 years ago. But now he's converted to like Islam and everything. Like he has changed as well. So those two are like my end goal, like guests. But I think because if you ask me like the vision, then I think sharing the story, just like sometimes when I'm doing the conversation, I'm like, where is this going? But I have to remind myself, like just showing this, like I'm an international student from Singapore, and then you're also my lecturer from Australia. It's like that in itself to me is the story. Like that's something that I think even if my dad doesn't enjoy or like doesn't understand this episode, he'll be like, is that my son? Like he's actually doing it, because he named me Hamka, which is a Muslim Indonesian guy philosopher. And I never knew like life would come full circle, but in English. So my granddad is also like a poet. My mom is also a Malay teacher. I used to say like, I'm never going to come close to any of these people. And then now I'm like, oh, I'm actually going back to like my root, because my granddad used to do like interviews for people as well in Malay.
Wow.
So it's like a weird thing, but I'm doing it internationally.
So good. And so interesting about Hamka. That's your...
He's like a very, very big... I don't know what exactly he did, but like he was in a community where like Islam wasn't fully there yet. And he was like preaching about it. And then he got sent to prison. And then he wrote a lot of books. And by the time he was released, like his books became like revolutionary and everything.
And does the name itself mean something?
It means, it's just an abbreviation of his full name. So Haji Abdul Malik Karim Amrullah. And then that's Hamka. And the worst part of it for me is like when I go to Indonesia, everybody knows that name. And they're like, Hamka. And then they speak to me in Indonesian. And I'm like, I can't speak Indonesian. So it's.
I remember Selamat Pagi from we did Indonesian. That was the thing. It's like this logic in the Australian schooling system of like, Indonesia's the closest neighbour. Let's teach kids that.
Indonesian.
It's like Spanish would have been really helpful, or like, Yeah, I don't
Or
know.
just help them in like.
Everyone
That's
goes to
right.
Bali, so might as well teach
That's
them.
Might as well
right.
teach
That's
them
right.
Indonesian, right? Yeah, I remember Chris Hemsworth was like using it when he was doing Presto in Indonesia as well. So he probably learned it in school.
Yeah. And I remember Ada Laba Laba Di Atas Meja was the other one, which is Dad, there's spiders on the table. I think is from some book or something.
Ada laba laba.
I think, Ada Laba Laba Di Atas Meja.
Yeah. There's like spiders on top of the table.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's just in my head. My brain remembers weird things. But I love this. Like I was saying, because my wife Shaylee was asking, "Oh, so what are you doing today?" I was like, "Oh, it's like one of my students from like a couple of years back. He's doing a podcast, and we're just going to catch up and I'll have this chat and see what's happening." But I like because there was definitely students in that cohort where you could see that people have a fire and they're like, "Oh no, I love this and I want to do something."
Yeah.
And like as a teacher or in any sphere, you're always trying to go, like trying to get people excited.
Yeah.
But like that was definitely something that showed in you right out of the gate of like, oh no, here's someone that actually wants to do this.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and there's a skill set there to go, oh yeah, this stuff looks great. Like, like it's...
Yeah, I remember being in that class being like, why is no one interested?
Yeah.
Like, I was the only one like, come on, let me get this HD. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's funny because I was chatting with another friend who teaches, and he was like, yeah, in a group of maybe 60, you might get 4 that really want to do it. And like, I think at that point I had... 60 or 70 students somewhere around there because some dropped off throughout the semester. But I'd say there was probably about 8 that were like, oh yeah, I think these 8 will stay in the world of media and kind of go on to do things. And then the others have kind of come here because they were interested. Now they're no longer interested or they just haven't got the drive or they maybe need a bit more life experience or because it's a tough... I feel for people that are starting out now because when I started... I look back and go, man, I should have started a YouTube channel and done something like Casey Neistat did.
Same.
Yeah, because like it was so ground level things beginning and like whole ecosystems of media starting out. Like, you know, when I finished high school, like YouTube was, you know, MySpace was the main thing when I finished high school and like Instagram wasn't a thing and YouTube wasn't really a thing. And so Facebook, you know, was just starting out. Like the amount of ecosystems that now exist of, you know, places that you could have gotten in at the ground level that I just didn't. Yeah,
if we started earlier.
Yeah, but when I started, like the big thing I wanted to do was to be making either really high end commercials or doing like fiction feature films. But just by happenstance, the doco space was where it's kind of all ended up being, just by networking and who I've met. And because when I very first started, when I did my degree, the last semester, which I don't think you guys had as part of your course, but at RMIT you had to go and do a placement.
Oh yeah.
Somewhere. Did you have that as part of yours?
If I did the full like 3 years, then I would have had that.
Okay. Yeah. Because in our final semester, I did my final semester. I did placement at a production company called Ghost Pictures, and they predominantly did documentaries. So that was kind of how I managed to get like all I did was edit assist and kind of be a production assistant. But even just by the nature of that, you then end up meeting people who are like, oh, you know that guy. And, oh, yeah, cool, come work on this. And so it's just that classic snowball of things. Yeah,
snowball is like the best word that I can use also.
Yeah.
The last question that I always ask to all the guests is, what advice would you give to yourself at the young age before you started everything? But I feel like we should ask the Daniel that was like fresh out of his divorce and everything. If you could say something to him, that Daniel, right, what would that last advice be?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'd tell myself anything, to be honest, because I think that everything that happened at that time naturally lent itself to where things are now, and I'm so happy with where things are now. Like it's kind of a very redeeming thing to be able to look back at kind of your toughest point in your life and just go, I'm so grateful for where I am now and all of the things that I've got going on now. Like remarried, very, very happily married. Like my wife Shaylee is a radio announcer and like we're so aligned on wanting to create content and to do things in the world creatively that have positive influence in society and kind of encourage connection and change and all those sorts of things. And with her being pregnant with our little bub, and we've just renovated our first house. Like we were blessed enough to be able to buy a place last year, and we've been renovating and doing all of that. So there's a lot of things that like I had been dreaming about for years and years and years and years that probably in this last 2 years have all come to fruition. So like, I guess maybe the thing I would say is just keep going and know that the good things will come. Like it's always that classic thing in a film where it's like, it's darkest just before the dawn, but like when you're in the thick of it and stuff is really tough and things are really hard, it is so hard to kind of go, will this just ever let up or get to where I want it to be? And I think for me, there's obviously big portions of life that aren't as I thought they would be, given my history and things that have happened. But in terms of where I am right now, I'm kind of exactly where I would want to be. So it's kind of that, I guess, very grateful thing of being able to look back and I guess being able to say to myself, just keep going. Like, it's going to get good. So I think good, going to get good. But I think for anyone else or any of your listeners that would be perhaps in a tough spot thinking, oh man, like, is just life ever going to get to the place I want it to be? Like, I guess my biggest encouragement to those people, and I guess to my past self, would be, yes, it can get there. Like, just keep at it. Like, get good people around you, like a good community, good friends. Don't try and do things on your own. Like, life absolutely is about relationships and the quality of those relationships around you, and being able to have people around you that champion you and kind of go, yeah, you can do this, just keep going. Yeah.
I mean, it's cliche because it's true, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's so true, because going through it every single day, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Starting it is already hard by itself. But then like, I mean, we related back right to the gym, right? All is the main denominator between all three of us men.
Yeah.
Starting it is already hard. Yeah. And then there'll be like a time where you hit 6 months and then you're like, there's no growth. There's like zero growth. You don't see anything. But if you just go on for another 6 months and then you'll see this biggest growth, right? That to me is the hardest part, when you're like maintaining that relationship, even in a relationship. Chasing is fun, right? Everybody loves to chase. But once you're like, the honeymoon is done, and then that maintaining the relationship, to me, that's the hardest part. And that advice goes to me as well, because like there has been moments these days where like I'm doing the podcast, I'm like, I love sharing the stories, but can I do this for like long term? Yeah. But yeah.
And just consistency, because like the gym, it's like people can do the New Year's resolution version of it and then go and then drop off. Yeah. And like, and just to be clear, I haven't been into the gym in a very long time. Running's my thing. But like that, just consistency, like running as a discipline, you lose your running legs so quickly if you don't just consistently keep up Ks. And so through COVID, I got into ultra running but I had a great friend next to me, this guy, Michael Griffin, who was also getting into it. So the days when I didn't want to go, he would be like, nah, come on, we said 6 a.m, we're going to do 10. Like, let's just get the 10. Like, and so again, for me, just having people around that encourage and kind of know what your goals are and where you want to head. And that goes, again, for career. Like, I think back to like when I was out of high school and like going, what do I do? Like my mum was the one to be like, well, you really like video stuff. Like, just do that. Like, start that, finish that. You'll learn things along the way. Like, people change careers multiple times in their life. If you don't end up, really loving it, you can do something else. But at least you've got the discipline of like knowing, like going to get a degree and do all that stuff. And she was totally right, because by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, actually, I love this. Like, she was bang on. Because I just think there's this psychological principle called the Johari window, or the Johari square. And it's basically, I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No.
It's basically these 4 quadrants. So like, and it's all the parts of what make up who you are. So if you imagine on the x-axis, you've got known to self and not known to self. And then on the y-axis, you've got known to others and not known to others. And so it forms these 4 squares where you end up having what's known to you and what's known to everyone else. And that's kind of the most open part of who you are. Then you have what's known to you and what's not known to others. And that's kind of your private self. But then there's these other dimensions where it's what's known to others and not known to you. And that's where people can see things about you that you just can't see about yourself. And that's your blind spot.
Yeah.
And then there's the part that's just not known to you and not known to everyone else. And that's the mystery of who you might become and who you, things that will come out of you as you grow and develop. And so like, I always just get very interested in that blind spot as like a section of, like, there's things that you two would have seen about me in this where you're like, I wonder if Dan knows that he's kind of like this. I probably don't. Like, and it'd be really helpful for you to tell me and to go, you know what, next time you do a podcast, don't be so, like, whatever. Like,
I know what you mean.
Yeah, like there's just things that you can, and that's where I even think like filming, doing this stuff yourself, it's so interesting doing, because it's almost like an other person that you can look back on. Like, it'd be so interesting you editing your own podcasts. What that psychologically does to who you are. And how you then change your mannerisms or how you behave in the world, or like knowing that, I should stand up more with my, my shoulders back, or like Yeah.
That's the thing with podcasts, right? Like, because you watch yourself so much and then you start to like, oh, I need to change this, I need to change that.
Yeah.
That's the thing I love about podcasts, especially if you self-reflect. There's so much.
Yeah.
All right, that's about it. Thanks, Daniel, for coming on the show, dude. I didn't expect the conversation to go this way, but it's exactly what I wanted.
Okay, good. Exactly. I'm glad. No, thank you for having me.